Okay, Fred, it looks like most folks have come in from the waiting room and have connected to audio, so you can go ahead and unmute yourself and get started.
Good morning. On behalf of the Addison County Economic Development Corporation Board of Trustees and the staff, welcome to the 26th annual meeting of the membership. It's great to see you all. It's been another interesting but productive year for ACEDC. And once again, for the health and safety of everyone, we're gathering virtually. It's my sincere hope that we'll be able to gather live into 2022 for our mixer and then for our annual meeting next year. Before we get started, I want to introduce Sarah Audette, who will be controlling the technical aspects of today's meeting. Sarah?
Thank you, Fred. Good morning, everybody. If you run into audio issues this morning, call in with your phone to hear the audio or speak, but stay logged into the meeting with your computer for video and voting purposes. If you need the call-in information, you can refer to the email confirmation that you received yesterday. Since we do have a large number of people in for today's meeting, I encourage you to use the speaker view rather than the gallery view, which you can toggle between by clicking the button at the top of your Zoom window. Speaker view means that the video of whoever is speaking will appear largest on your screen. We will be using the polling feature to vote today. When you see the poll on your screen, select your choice and click the submit button. Please only vote if you're a voting member of ACEDC. If more than one person from your business is attending today, please only vote if you have been designated to do so. If you're not sure if you're designated to do so, feel free to send me a direct message and I can let you know. You will notice a machine-generated transcript at the bottom of your screen. If you wish to turn this feature off, click on the More button at the bottom of your Zoom screen and then click Hide Subtitle. And finally, this meeting is being recorded. Fred?
Great. Thank you, Sarah. Again, thank you all for joining us today. We appreciate and value all of our members and partners. Our success advancing economic and community development in Addison County really depends on maintaining and building strong partnerships and collaborating with everyone that's on this call today and those who couldn't make it as well. I'd like to recognize some special guests that have joined us this morning. I haven't been able to check the whole list, but they registered. So if they're not here, I apologize. Chris Saunders from Senator Leahy's office. Chris, are you there? No, okay. Lindsay Curley, Secretary of the Agency of Commerce and Community Development. Brett Long, Deputy Commissioner of the Department of Economic Development. I see Brett's on. Senator Ruth Hardy. And Representatives Robin Scheid and Diane Lanford. Thank you all for joining us. I want to thank them all for joining us and for all their work over the past year and a half, securing, allocating, and dispersing funds for COVID recovery. It's really been a partnership involving everyone at the local, regional, state, and federal levels to ensure a fast and equitable recovery for individuals, communities, and businesses. And the work continues. Now, Sarah, did you see if Susan was able to join?
I'm here.
You're here, great. Had a little wind issue this morning. So now I'm going to turn the meeting over to Susan Evans McClure, who's our incoming ACEDC president-elect.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Fred. I'm Susan Evans McClure. I'm the Executive Director at Lake Champlain Maritime Museum and current Vice President and incoming President of the ACEDC Board. As Fred mentioned, there are some pretty high winds at my house today, so the internet and the power have already gone on and off twice. So this is one of the things we've all been experiencing in rural Vermont over the past 20 months. So please bear with me if I disappear. It's a pleasure being part of this organization that is working so hard to support our local businesses and nonprofits, which drive our local economy. The past 20 months have really been like no other, and I've been so proud and impressed by the way our community has come together to weather the storm and build a stronger Addison County for the future. It's also my pleasure this morning to introduce to you my talented and dedicated fellow board members. I'll introduce them by name, and if you could all unmute yourselves and say hello after I say your name, so everyone can see who you are. So first up is Sarah Morris of Basin Harbor, who's the current board president.
Good morning, everyone.
Matt Curran from Middlebury College, he's the current board treasurer.
Good morning, everybody.
Carolyn Carpenter, the National Bank of Middlebury and current board secretary.
Good morning.
Chris Wilson from Collins Aerospace, the current at-large executive committee member.
Morning, everybody.
Joseph Andriano, of the Law Office of Joseph Andriano, representing the Regional Planning Commission.
Good morning, everyone.
Valerie Caples from the town of Bristol, representing the town of Bristol. And David Castle from Mechanical Advantage.
Hi, good morning, everyone.
David Estes from People's United Bank. Robert Feuerstein of Kennedy Brothers, representing the Addison County Chamber of Commerce.
Good morning, all.
Marie Jewett of Co-op Insurance.
Good morning, everyone.
Jason LaRock of Otter Creek Engineering.
Morning, everyone.
Jeff Olson from the Addison County Real Estate, representing the town of Middlebury.
Hi, everybody.
Rennie Perry, representing the city of Virgins. John Roberts.
Good morning.
Oh, there he is. Hi, Rennie.
It was hard to unmute myself.
John Roberts of the Champlain Valley Farmer Coalition.
Good morning, everyone.
Thomas Thompson of Porter Medical Center. And Tom couldn't be here today, so Amy Barr is representing Porter today. So Amy, if you also want to say hi, so folks know who you are.
Yes, I'm here. Thank you. Good morning.
Bill, and finally, last but absolutely not least, Bill Townsend of JP Carrera and Sons.
Good morning.
So please join me in thanking them for their service to the organization and Addison County during 2021. So some virtual clapping, thank you. I also want to recognize the outgoing board members and thank them for their service to ACEDC and our community. And the folks who are leaving the board at the end of 2021 are Sarah Morris, Carolyn Carpenter, David Estes, and Marie Jewett. And while they're leaving, their contributions to ACEDC and our community will continue long after their time on the board. And a special thank you to Sarah for bringing me to the ACEDC board as well. Thank you, Sarah, Caroline, David, and Marie. More virtual clapping is in the script. So, Brett.
Yeah, a special courier will be dropping off these handcrafted Danforth gifts to those 4 outgoing board members. I know it's a little hard to make out, but has our name across and then their name in recognition of your service to Addison County as an ACEDC trustee. So I want to thank you all for your service, and it's been a pleasure working with you. I'm sad to see you go, but I know you're leaving us in great hands with the incoming officers. And again, it's just been really wonderful learning and working with you all.
And one additional thank you to Marie, Sarah, and Caroline for their work on the executive committee and as board officers as well. And now I will turn things over to our current board president, Sarah Morris, to conduct the business portion of our meeting. Take it away, Sarah.
Thank you, Susan. It's hard to believe I joined the board in January of 2015, which feels like a lifetime ago. And I just continue to be impressed by the group of the board members and really what the organization accomplishes. I know we all saw that effort, which was Herculean in this past year, but it really just all the more shows how important this organization is. So thrilled to be a part of it. And thank you all for taking the time to be here today, not only to support the organization, but to learn a little bit about the climate that's out there in terms of the economy, and looking forward to the presentation shortly. So just a few items here. You should have received a copy of the minutes from last year's annual meeting. And if I could have a motion to approve those, please.
I will move to approve the minutes of the 2020 ACEDC annual meeting as presented in the annual meeting notice.
Thank you, Susan. May I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. You should now see a voting poll on your screen. If you could please vote and hit submit. Any discussion on the minutes before we see the results of the poll? Hearing none and seeing 100% approval. Thank you for your help with that. You also should have seen a copy of some amendments to our bylaws. Those were issued with the meeting invitation. May I have a motion to approve those as written, please?
So moved.
Thank you, Rennie.
I
May I
will
have a second?
oh, I'll
Thank you,
second that.
Susan. Thank you.
Enthusiastic second.
Great. If you could all use the polling feature, we'll vote to approve those as well. Any discussion while those are being voted on? Great, hearing none, and with approval, the motion passes. I will now turn it over to Marie Jewett for a report from the nominating committee.
Good morning. So the nominating committee is pleased to present a slate of new and continuing board members for your consideration as presented in the meeting notice. For one-year terms, Darcy Tart, People's Bank, Christopher LaPierre, National Bank of Middlebury, Gina Laro, Cooperative Insurance Companies, and Jason Robar, SIA Ventures. For their first three-year term, Dave Castle, Mechanical Advantage, Jason LaRock, Otter Creek Engineering, John Roberts, Champlain Valley Farmer Coalition, and Thomas Thompson, UVM Medical Center, Porter Hospital. And for his second three-year term, Bill Townsend, JP Carrera.
Thank you, Marie. May I have a motion to approve the slate of directors for 2022?
I will make that motion to approve the slate of directors for 2022.
Thank you, Susan. May I have a second, please?
Second.
Thank you, Rennie and Caroline, for the tie. We could all vote, please. Any discussion on any of the slates that were presented? Okay, hearing none and seeing the approval results. Congratulations, everyone. The poll has passed, or the slate rather, and hope everyone has a great year ahead. Fred, I'll hand it back over to you for a report.
Great. Thank you, Sarah. And thanks again for your service on the board and serving as president. Again, it's been wonderful working with you. All right, let's see, I need to share. Great. So everybody seeing the presentation?
Yes, that looks great.
Right. Well, just to give you a little review for the last fiscal year for the organization. Oops. Oh, how'd that get in there? Oh, yes. ACEDC was selected as the 2021 Nonprofit Business of the Year by the Addison County Chamber for Community Achievement. Thank you. I want to thank the Chamber for that honor. Here's some of what we did over the past year and a half, but primarily over the past year that the Chamber was recognizing us for. Some of the COVID response and recovery efforts that we had, where we offered our borrowers deferrals and decreased our loan interest rate. We added about 250 clients, primarily very small and small businesses in the area, to our roster of clients, in addition to our normal, borrowers and regular businesses that we're normally working with. We provided everyone in the region with regular COVID updates, including a COVID update and resource web pages. We tried to monitor the very fast moving federal and state programs, kept everybody in the region informed. So brought, information down from the state and federal levels, and then advocated for Addison County in the legislature and with Congress. We managed a statewide technical assistance program. So all the regional development corporations were involved in a technical assistance program, and ACEDC managed that for the RDC statewide and also implemented it here in Addison County. We also provided assistance to the Agency of Commerce to review some round 2 of the recovery grants to help get that money out the door quickly. We also assisted Table 21, which is a local nonprofit. We helped them design their COVID assistance grant application. And we convened a Addison County recovery team over the past year to collaborate and coordinate on assistance. And as I stated, when we accepted the Community Achievement Award from the Chamber, recovery efforts were and continue to be a partnership from the local level, whether it's municipalities and local media, the regional level, ACEDC, the Regional Planning Commission, United Way, the Chamber, right on up to at the state level with the legislature and the administration, and of course at the federal level with Congress. So it's really a partnership. So while we undertook all of those COVID-related activities, we also continued with our regular activities. We conducted 63 business visits, both live and virtual, over the past year, and made hundreds of referrals to programs and services. We held 8 events we had about 198 participants in those events. I think all of them were virtual. And those were done primarily we had 2 partners we worked with on those, primarily the Chamber. In the realm of financial resources, ACEDC brought about $551,000 in non-COVID resources to Addison County over the past year through our USDA loan to us through the intermediary relending program. So we were able to recapitalize our revolving loan fund. And then we also got a grant for a feasibility study. It was a $30,000 grant from USDA, and 3 other grants for three businesses in the region. We also participated in some capacity in the over $14 million in COVID resources that came to the region. I don't want to say we're responsible for these, by no means, but we were involved in each one in one manner or another. We helped Maple Broadband write a grant to USDA, which they just found out that they are going to receive. As I mentioned, we managed the RDC's REV2 program, the Restart Vermont Technical Assistance Program, that brought $116,000 to the region. There were $14.3 million in recovery grants to 231 businesses in the region, and we reviewed some of the applications. We had to review non-Addison County applications, but we helped the state review those. And we assisted, referred and informed businesses about the sole proprietor program, provided technical assistance directly to some businesses, actually helped them apply to that program. And that brought 142,000 to 15 businesses in Addison County through the sole proprietor program. And then we, again, informed and referred people to their banks and information about and provided technical assistance about applying to the PPP program. And 78 million came to the region to 775 businesses for the PPP loan program. Hopefully those have all been forgiven, so now they're grants. Also, finally, in the realm of financial resources, during the last fiscal year, we financed 2 more projects in the region and reached a milestone of lending for our revolving loan funds of $5 million. So since we started having revolving loan funds here, we've financed about 106 projects and 70 businesses throughout Addison County. And that leveraged millions of dollars in capital investment and helped create thousands of jobs in the region. We also continue to be a convener of groups and committees and action groups, leading a lot of them. We started and continue to convene the Addison County Workforce Alliance. We have some other partners that have stepped up to take leadership of that group, so I could step back, but we're still involved in that. As I mentioned, we started the Addison County Recovery Team during COVID recovery to coordinate and collaborate on efforts regarding COVID. We've now kind of shifted that to the Addison County Partner Group that continues to meet to collaborate and coordinate among the regional organizations. I served as chair of the Middlebury Economic Health Committee, and we submitted that report last October. I serve on the Makery Steering Committee, and the Makery is doing very well at the Hannaford Career Center, and encourage everybody to take advantage of that resource. And I serve on the CEAC, which is the Climate Economy Action Center of Addison County. I serve in their community advisory group. And we have a regional marketing partnership that meets regularly. That's ourselves, the chamber, and the 3 downtown organizations. So all those groups continue to meet, and luckily those meetings, I should say strategically, those meetings are resulting in action items. We're not just meeting; we're actually trying to get some things done. We have some activities that have come out of those groups that are ongoing. We're partnering with Adam's team at the Regional Planning Commission on a comprehensive economic development strategy, or CEDS. That's an EDA funded planning process that will eventually have us designated as an EDA region that can bring more funding into the region. We're also partnering with Adam's group on an application to EPA for brownfields funding. And also on the Economic Corridor project in Virginia. So I serve on one of the committees for that project. We also participated in the Kickstart Middlebury program that brought 6 startups to Middlebury, primarily in the downtown. I helped them write that application and then served on the selection committee there. And as I mentioned, the regional marketing group, we meet regularly, I participate in that regularly, and recently filed an application with the State Agency of Commerce for a regional marketing grant that hopefully will come to the region very soon. And another effort that's going on with the Regional Development Corporation statewide, but also ACEDC, along with our many partners, are implementing several initiatives in the area of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. We've got several initiatives ongoing for that, for those efforts. And also we launched our a new website and member platform internally. So looking ahead, that brings me to what are our priorities for the upcoming year. And one thing is, I'm very excited to announce that we've hired Barbara Richardson as our new office manager. Say hi, Barbara. Maybe with the presentation on, you can't see her, but and also Dana Hanley as our new project and grant manager. Unfortunately, Dana couldn't join us today, but they just started on Tuesday, and Barbara's jumping right in, keeping the office and me organized and keeping track of all the details for the organization. And Dana is going to be play a huge part in our role as we're trying to have a bigger role bringing resources to the region, researching grant opportunities, and developing action plans for economic development. So that's what Dana will be doing. So as you see here, our priorities for FY22 are we're going to continue our diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging initiatives. We're going to work more directly and focus on workforce development activities. So I'm very interested in what Matt is going to have to say to us in a few minutes. We're going to be working on improving the entrepreneurial ecosystem in Addison County, and through Dana's efforts, increasing capital availability. And by that, I mean financing, but also equity investment and also grants and new kinds of loans to the region. And we'll hopefully finish up the comprehensive economic development strategy. That there'll be a draft strategy document ready in the spring, and that's scheduled to go to EDA next fall. So it's a 2-year process that we're in the middle of right now. So there's our contact information. Hopefully you all have that. And there's the new staff. That's Dana in the middle. And I don't know who the ugly guy is on the left, and that's Barbara on the right. And clearly I forgot to bring my scarf for picture day. So that is my update for the past year. I'm going to stop sharing and quickly go to see if anybody has any questions on our activity. You can just unmute or. Sarah, do you see if Matt is on yet?
He's not on yet, but I did send him an email to let him know that we're running ahead of schedule.
Okay.
He should be on in the next 5 minutes, he said.
Great. All right. Well, we wait for Matt. Does anybody have any questions about what I just presented or anything about the organization? I really appreciate you all being here. And again, I hope that we can get together live next year. If you have a question, just unmute yourself.
Well, I'd just say that it certainly was a great year, and we really have to thank you, Fred, for all of your work. You have really worked seemingly around the clock to get all these things done, and we really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you. As I mentioned, it's truly a partnership, and I need to thank the board for their support, but all of our partners as well. We couldn't do it without them. And there's a few things we can do on our own, but clearly most of what we're able to accomplish is through partnerships. Bram?
Yeah, also not a question, just an expression of gratitude. You guys just accomplished a huge amount with a small crew under very difficult conditions. So congrats and thank you.
Thank you, Bram. Appreciate it.
And Matt is just now entering
Great.
The meeting.
I will start my introduction. So today we're going to hear from Matt Barewicz. who is the Director of Labor Market Information at the Vermont Department of Labor. Matt's got 15 years professional experience as an economist, both in the public and private sectors. Additionally, he's provided economic instruction at the collegiate level. Mathew graduated from the University of Vermont with a double major in economics and French. He earned his master's degree in economics from the San Diego State University. On a personal note, I've known Matt for at least 15 years from when I worked at the state, and we worked with one of his previous employers. Matt's one of the few economists that I know who can bring a bit of levity to economic forecasting and reporting. So we're looking forward to Matt's presentation today. There should be time after Matt's presentation for some Q&A. So when he's wrapping up, you can use the raise hand function and Sarah will call on you, or you can post your question in the chat and she'll ask the question on your behalf. So with that, we'll turn it over to Matt for his presentation.
Great, good morning. Fred, how's my audio coming through?
Little choppy, but we can hear you.
Oh, you know what? I should switch internet streams here. Hold on. In Vermont, we all have to learn to adapt, right? We got to be able to be flexible at times here. So let me make sure I am getting the best signal I can.
We probably lost him. He'll probably have to come back on.
And
there he is.
We should be good to go. All right.
There. All right.
Hey,
Thanks,
thank you
Matt.
so much. Yeah, happy to join you today. I appreciate the warm introduction, Fred. And I was looking through the participant list, and certainly a lot of familiar names, friendly names, people I've had either professional or personal experience with. So instead of calling out individuals and risking missing a few, I'll just say good morning to all. And I really appreciate you all having me here today. I hope your meeting has been productive thus far. We are a little bit of ahead of schedule as far as the agenda is concerned. So we will have ample time for discussions. So we will jump into the presentation. I welcome questions throughout. I have the split screen going. And so if people raise their hands, or I'll try and monitor the chat as well. Sarah's going to help me with that as well. But I welcome questions throughout as well as at the end. Sometimes it's hard to hold a question, especially if it's related to data. I will be showing, it's a fair warning. I'm an economist, so I do bring tables and graphs to me with me wherever I go. So sometimes holding a question, if it's related to a particular slide, can be a challenge. So I don't mind questions throughout. So, it's excited to be even virtually back in Addison County. I lived there for a number of years and, really grew to love that place. It is a special community and it is unique in terms of Vermont. I love how each county has its own feel, and Addison County certainly has that. So my screen sharing should be going through now. And great, I appreciate the nods. It's always nice, even if you don't know who I'm looking at, that I get a nod every now and then. I can see a couple of screens, and so therefore that gives me the confidence I need to go forward. So yes, good morning. How was apple season this year? How was it? I didn't get over there this year, but I always love that time of year in Addison County, certainly. I used to live behind an orchard, so we got very in tune with the harvest season. So
bumper crops this year, bumper crops.
Oh, really? Great. Ooh, that's great. All right. Well, let's jump into it. We're going to start our stories here. Economics, I consider a big story. It's a long story that's been running since the start of time, since we started recording it. And it's fascinating to try and dial in older theories with newer theories and marry where we are and try and understand what's going on, because really what we're trying to do is understand the past to better understand where we might be heading as a future. And there's certainly a lot of questions about that today. about where we're heading as a future. And so let me do some introductions, and then we'll start some of these broader conversations. So as Fred said, I am with the Vermont Department of Labor. Though I am a state employee, I'm 100% federally funded. The U.S. Department of Labor provides us our resources. The bulk of our money comes from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, which we abbreviate as BLS. The Bureau of Labor Statistics provides us money and resources to collect, compile, and release economic data for the state of Vermont consistent with federal methodology. So Vermont is part of the national 54 region area that produces economic statistics that can all be comparable. And 54 of the 50 states plus Guam, Puerto Rico, the Virgin Islands, and Washington, D.C. So if you looked up data on how many people working in manufacturing in California, you could compare it to the same data in Vermont. If you want to know the unemployment rate in Alaska and compare it to the unemployment rate in Vermont, you could, because all those definitions, all those survey instruments, all the methodology is the exact same. So we're part of that national system. And so we appreciate that support. That's the bulk of our work. We get about a quarter of our budget comes from the Employment and Training Administration, also within the U.S. Department of Labor. And they give us money to do partnerships, to do outreach, to do presentations, to do internships, to do special studies, to have a website. And this is the funding that we leverage to our maximum ability to be as front and center with any discussion that might benefit from information, because really that's what we're all about. We're here to provide economic information, explain what it means, how best to use it, and really highlight the strengths and weaknesses of it. And our goal is to never tell someone what to do. Our goal is to provide information to help them make the best decision for themselves, their business, their constituents, who they represent, their school. You know, we work a lot with schools on educational training or program development, but also even students who might be trying to decide on an educational or employment pathway. So we're here, we're available. If you have questions about this data, we answer the phone, we answer emails, that's what we do. You don't even need to know how to ask the question correctly. You just need to know how to get in touch with us. My contact information will be embedded throughout this presentation, as well as you can always get it from Fred. And if you have feedback, there'll be 2 plugs for requests for feedback right on our website, vtlmi.info. In the upper right-hand corner, that square, complete an ELMI customer surveys present, and you can just answer a 5-question survey. Or there's even an open-ended question at the end if you want to say, hey, you should really study this, or have you thought about looking into that? And it's all anonymous, so we get some good ideas there. Sometimes people tell us things we should look into, and we do research that way. So I just wanted to start moment of appreciation. We've obviously been about 20 months into a global health pandemic, and I know many of you are either business owners or elected officials or volunteers or even parents who've had to do homeschooling. All of that is such important work for the economic landscape of Vermont and building our successful future. So really appreciate all the work that you're doing individually, as a business, as an employee, whatever it is, whatever your role in your community is, it's so important. And it really adds tremendous value to what we're trying to accomplish here in Vermont, which is, economic independence for everyone, I think is a good universal way of saying it, at least from my economic standpoint. As we go through this, I will try not to share any opinions. I don't have opinions in a professional setting because, as I said, I'm here to provide information, talk about its strengths and weaknesses. I'm not a policy analyst. I'm not an advocate for a particular outcome. If it is perceived that I have a bias or an intended outcome that I'm trying to drive to, I lose credibility. My division loses credibility for its ability to provide information to help people make decisions. So, I don't, but I guess more appropriately, I'm here to say, I'm not representing the Department of Labor on anything I'm saying here today. Hopefully I'm just representing the data and telling the story that they have. And there's never a good time for a global pandemic, but if you were gonna have one, you would never draw it up to start and coincide with the 2020 census. So the census was going on in 2020, and this is such an important part of our US history. Every 10 years, the United States Census Bureau takes a pause to do an entire count of where people are at. Well, there's 2 reasons it was a bad time for a pandemic to happen. One, it disrupted how the counts were done, and we'll talk a little bit about that. I think a lot of that has been accounted for, so really the only lingering effects of the census itself was delays in production, because they did keep the census open longer. And so we are still waiting on some key, really sub-state socioeconomic breakdowns. And those will be coming out very soon. And they might have already been released, I just haven't checked. But once we get those, we're going to be diving into those for months on end, trying to understand the Vermont population. So that's going to be a reoccurring theme, is that we're still missing, or we still have not analyzed all the complete and available data that will be available from the 2020 census because of delays in production. But more importantly, what happened is the census, happens every 10 years, and then that becomes the bedrock from which all statistical programs are built. So in 2010, we complete the census. It's all great. We finalize, the Census Bureau finalizes it. They provide it to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. The Bureau of Labor Statistics incorporates it into all their data programs. Well, the calendar moves forward from that point, right? And so 2011 happens, 2012 happens. Each year, the Census Bureau is doing 1-year estimates built on top of the 2010 estimate. And just like if you were stacking blocks, by the time you get to 14, 15, 16, 17, you have a number of blocks stacked up high, and the quality of your stacking, it really gets called into question because it starts to wobble, right? So by the time you get to 2019, you are at the most unstable part of your estimates, because of what it's built on is a 9 years of single estimates and the 2010. So when 2020 happened, we don't have the 2020 census data incorporated into our data products yet. We will incorporate the 2020 census in March of next year. So there's this two worlds where we have to understand, A, we don't have all the data, and B, it's not in our statistical models that we're going to be talking about today. That said, there could be some big changes. What I imagine is there'll be more level shifts as opposed to trend changes. So meaning that if we say there's 340,000 people in the labor force, maybe it's 350, just using round numbers, making that up. So there's a level shift, but the trends that we're going to be talking about are the important. Those are the storylines from an economic perspective that I think are going to stay with us longer. There could be some surprises, but nonetheless, let's just hold the trends. What we're going to focus on mostly is the trends of the data we do have. And then come March 2020, we will see how many of these trends, which we believe should be pretty solid, but where we're at for levels, where we are at for numbers at that point. So let's jump into these partial results, because now everyone's just so breathless with anticipation to see some data. Here we go, 10 years, and this is what I mean. The Census Bureau has a notoriously bad reputation of working with Vermont's population data and coming up with good estimates. In 2010, our population was about 626,000, give or take. And for the next 9 years, they said it either went up 500 or down 500, basically. And every now and then you'd get these large adjustments. But it was literally like a 1-to-1. 1 year was up, 1 year was down. 1 year was up, 1 year was down. And so for 10 years, we at best thought we had 0, maybe 0.1% population growth, maybe 0.1% population loss. So for 10 years, we had this. Well, it comes out, 2020 finalizes, and we get 643,000. And that difference of 17,000 may not seem like a lot to Los Angeles. That's a rounding error, right? But to Vermont, that was like 17,000 people we did not anticipate, right? And this started the conversation of oh my gosh, well, when did they get here? Is this just all COVID people that just showed up in April and got counted at that time? Or is this something that we had been missing for several years, perhaps after 2014, 2015? Was incoming migration higher than we anticipated? And, I think there's a little bit of both in that, right? As we'll see with the trends in data, it's very difficult for one factor to be a sole contributor to any sort of outcome. So I think there's a little bit of both, and so, but we don't have the breakdowns of who these extra 17,000 is, because it makes a big difference. If we're talking about 17,000 people over the age of 75 or 17,000 people under the age of 18, right? Those are different characteristics. And from a population standpoint, it really can impact how you would look at the future of Vermont, specifically from a workforce standpoint. Now I'm starting to pivot into my daily role here as an economist with the Department of Labor. I talk a lot about labor force, not just people.
Matt, do we know
Yes.
where they located in Vermont?
We do know a little bit. Let's see if that's the next slide. Yes. So here are the partial results by county. So now we're looking at 2020 census results, and what we're looking at is a change. Let me just preface this before we get right there. This translates to about a 3% population growth over a 10-year period. The US grew about 6 or 7%. So even though we're saying 3%, holy cow, that's huge. And I was excited. I've been banging on my federal partner's door. When can we get this data embedded in our current statistical models? Because 17,000, and I'm talking to states like California, like Texas, like Florida, people out of DC, and they're like, we're not so concerned about those 17,000 right now. Nonetheless, from a US standpoint, they had a 6.5, 7% population growth over that 10-year period. We had 3%. And for us, that was like shocking, right? This was big news. So now putting that statewide context of about a 3% overall population growth, with the US being about 6.5, somewhere in there. Now let's take a look at these counties. And you can see the darker the green, the more population increase. The darker the red, the greater the population decrease. Let's go right in on Addison County to warm us up here. At a 1.5% increase in population, plus 500. So population growth, certainly, not robust population growth relative to the state or relative to the US by any stretch of the imagination. And this is where our conversation about where do these people come from between 2010 and 2020 come in, with those two theories being one, was it economic migration or was it COVID refugees? The data that would support the latter, from my understanding, is that 3.1% down in, what is that, Windham County? Windsor? Sorry, absent my labeling, apparently I'm confusing the two. Even Windham and Windsor will cite, because that 1.9% and the 3.1%, I've heard from people that work in Southern Vermont, particularly in real estate, that they had a big surge in population increases, and particularly around, some of the the Killington areas, the secondary home areas, not Killington, can't think of it right now. The secondary home areas around that part of the state. I guess it's too early for me. I should have stuck to my 8:30 start time, Fred. I'm a little rusty here. And when you look at the data, and Art Wolf, who's an economist in Vermont, did a story on this, actually highlighting that some of the towns that have really high concentrations of second homes, or typically thought of as seasonal homes or secondary homes, actually showed some big population increases in 2020. And I think that could bear out here in the 3.1% in your lower right. As far as economic migration in general over the 10-year period, I think you look to the northwestern part of the state, and you see Chittenden County obviously leading the way at 7.5% increase. And then the associated bedroom communities around Chittenden County, with Lamoille and Franklin being right up there, and even Grand Isle, all with greater than state average increases in population. I will say there's 5 towns in Addison County that are technically part of the Chittenden County labor market area. The 5 northernmost being Moncton, and I think it even gets to Lincoln. So I'd have to check my map again. When I lived in Addison County, I knew all 5 at the top of my head, but now I can't remember. I do remember when I lived in Moncton that it was part of technically the county labor market area, the Burlington labor market area. So nonetheless, you're seeing some population growth in the northwestern part of the state, no surprise there. I think what really was the surprise in this is the lower right corner being population increases, because up until this point, for that 10-year period between 2010 and 2020, we had been seeing population declines in the upper right-hand corner, Essex and Caledonia, but also the lower 4. And so the 3 out of the 4 in the lower quadrant, they're actually switched to positive over the 10-year period. Rutland County still being down. And that's down a good chunk there, that 1.7%. And if anyone's ever taken the time, and I don't have the data at hand, Stratton, thank you, Bram. Yes, Stratton. I'm like, why am I bricking so hard this morning on major ski or resort communities? But Rutland, if you ever look, and there's some fascinating works about it, and maybe actually LMI should do a quick white paper on this. If you look at major cities in Vermont and look at their population change, not just over decades, but over nearly centuries, and you see the population growth, Rutland has gone through some major transformation, right? In terms of how many people used to live in Rutland versus how many people live in Rutland now. And I think there's some really interesting tales from an economic historical standpoint. Where I grew up, Essex is one of their own city now. So that's news in my world. All right, so we're moving forward here. Now let's get into some data. So if you've seen me present before, you've seen this graph 1,000 times over, and I'm not going to spend too much time on it. It's just for context. It's grounding us in this conversation of the current recession. So to understand the current recession, let's take a look at the Great Recession, which was the recession of 2007. What you're seeing here is data for all US recessions. So this is United States data. Every recession has been put into percentage terms, so it can all be compared to show the depth, how deep of a recession it was, percent job loss up to down, and then how long the recession was, left to right being time. So the Great Recession, the red line, really stands out from a US perspective as one of the worst recessions, if not the worst recession since World War II. It was the deepest, meaning 6 out of every 100 jobs were lost. And then it was the longest left to right months, approaching nearly 80 months to get back to where they were pre-recession. So for this particular recession, it started December 2007. It bottomed out in like May of 2010. And then from that point forward, it grew. But it did have like about an 18-month, 24-month downward period that you're seeing here that caused this to be known as the Great Recession. Well, if we compare the Great Recession, now we're looking at US versus Vermont, starting at 2007 as the zero line. You can see that the recession known as the Great Recession, where the US lost 6 out of every 100 jobs and Vermont lost 4 out of every 100 jobs. Well, if you look at this, about 2013, 2014, both the US and the Vermont economy start adding jobs above the 2007 level. So there's growth, and the US economy tends to grow faster than the Vermont economy. The US economy grows faster, a lot of that due to population growth, which we talked about. By just sheer traditional economic metrics, the more people you stuff into a region, the more economic activities there's going to be. As a result, economic growth tends to be higher at the US level because of population growth, where that's a big contributor to it. But as you see, by the time you get to early 2020, when the pandemic happened, the US economy was up 10% in terms of between 2007 and just before the pandemic, had 10% job growth. And then nearly overnight was down 5%. So they lost 15% of all jobs. In Vermont, we were, bouncing around to like 3-4% positive growth, but we lost 20%. So we can get rid of the history now and just focus on what this recession means. When you switch the script from talking about, oh, the US had a bad recession, they lost 6 out of every 100 jobs, to, oh, the US had a really bad recession, they lost 15 out of every 100 jobs. Or in Vermont, we lost 4 out of every 100 jobs, or now 20 out of every 100 jobs, meaning 1 out of every 5. My goodness, this is a much different conversation than the last recession. And that's for 2 reasons. 1, the order of magnitude. And 2, and this will be a teaser for our discussion as we go forward, is the economic recovery is much different. In 2009, 2010s, at the bottom of the economic downturn, the last economic downturn, employers weren't hiring that much. And there was a large amount of people who are unemployed and actively looking for work. Well, we know that's not the situation now. It's in fact the exact opposite. It's a flip where there are much fewer people looking for work or available to work, and we'll talk about those reasons. But also employers are rapidly trying to hire as fast as they can. If there's employers in this room, I'm sure I could get some sort of sound of agreement on that, because employers are actively trying to hire right now. We saw, it's not like we didn't see that completely coming out of the 2007 recession. It took a couple of years though. It took about 2011, 2012, we started to hear noise at Department of Labor that employers were really actively trying to hire again. And some industries were already starting to face employer challenges in filling and recruiting for their positions. So, we were in a tight labor market condition before COVID, and COVID certainly did not help that. But what we're seeing here is that now we're going to just look at the Vermont data. Let's look at what Vermont, the last 2 recessions look like. The purple line being quote unquote the Great Recession, and the 2020 line being in red being the current recession. You can see that this is a much different picture, but all in all, we're basically after 18 months back to where we were in the last recession at the down point. So at the worst of the last recession, we're basically back to there. Again, we're under different circumstances. So just so people understand, the 5% equals about 15,000 jobs. These are jobs that we're measuring, so these aren't people. And they don't always match up because one individual can have multiple jobs. But this is close metric. And the other thing is that this only includes filled jobs. And that's going to be a conversation that we're going to emphasize as we go forward in here, because I want to look at a couple of industries of note for Vermont before we dive in deep into the labor force, because that is a crux of the issue. I think it's important to look at the demand side for labor in industry, because when we break it down, what's interesting first and foremost about this recession is that there's no individual region. This graph, all it says is that there's no difference between how Burlington's doing versus the rest of Vermont. That is a big story, that there is no difference or not a meaningful difference, because the 2007 recession, all the economic recovery was concentrated in urban areas across the country. So Burlington really grew and really had a strong economic recovery. Burlington did, as did all the major urban areas, and that became a big part of the economic recovery conversation from the last recession, is that it's urban driven, it's urban based, and that rural economies and rural Vermont, rural America were struggling. Well, this particular recession has hit us in a way that the economic recovery is more evenly balanced. So I'm pointing that out because that was such a big part of the narrative coming out of the last recession, was that it was urban-based recovery, urban-based economic growth, and that's not the case in this one. It's more balanced. To Brett's question, why does some of the charts start to drop off in the recent months? There's a great example of it here with the red line. I think that's statistical noise. I think, again, we have to kind of look at the arc and look that, so what happens with this data is we produce it on a month-to-month basis based on the best information we have. After we release 12 months of information, we will go back, we will take a pause, and we will work with our federal partners to fold in a whole bunch more information, actually a lot more quality information that wasn't available at the time. And then what we do is called benchmark, and we'll re-benchmark everything. So we'll redo this. So I anticipate that to be smoothed out. So you see that it jumped up quickly around month 17. I think that was probably an overstatement of how fast we grew. And then recently has been an overstatement of how fast we've declined. I think there's some love in the middle there that would need to be emphasized. So if I could use my marker and just draw kind of a straight line between where the curve looks kind of flat between the jagged sawtooth, I would. And could the drop, and this is Representative True's point, could the drop off be partially due to the Delta variant? And yes, there's a big part of that. And we'll see that in some of the industry data, where you'll see the summer months all of a sudden get rosy, and then December comes along, like even in December of 2020, and everything kind of shuts down again. So that certainly has something to do with it. But anytime you're talking about the data at the very, very end of the tail, is most likely it's just like a data quality thing. It's some short-term noise that'll eventually be ironed out once we incorporate better data. So, okay. So let's look at industries of note. And this goes right to Robin's point right here, that we're going to start with leisure and hospitality. And I'll drill in and use this as an example. But you can see leisure and hospitality was hit during the economic downturn of 2009, but it was not like it was today, right? People weren't questioning of whether they ever wanted to get on a plane again. It was just like, when can I afford to get back on a plane? And you can see that when we were talking about the full economic recovery at the US and Vermont levels being 2013, 2014, well, leisure and hospitality started adding jobs over its 2007 level in 2011. So they started economic growth a lot sooner. So between 2011 and 2019, you see the industries both in the US and in Vermont growing. Well, overnight, then this was what makes this recession so shocking, is that it's like over a 2-month period of time, everything happened, right? So in Vermont, we had 10% job increase from 2007, and then overnight we had over 50% job loss. So that means that's it works out to be about 2/3. So a 66% swing. 2/3 of all jobs in leisure and hospitality were lost within a 2-month time period. And you can see the economic recovery there. It has this jagged point where it gets like to August, and then it comes down again. And that's to the point where I think like people's concerns about COVID resume. So the summer months, there might have been an upswing, and then the winter months and everything kind of pulls back, and now we're kind of back on growing again. And so leisure and hospitality is one of those industries that, you know, this is an economic downturn that is getting more on the, it's impacting individuals more so. It's not like a business based. It's not like, you know, oh, the construction or real estate economic downturn of 1990, or the tech bubble of 2001, or the financial crisis of 2007. This is a global health pandemic. And what this is causing people to do, and this is going to be the reoccurring theme, and I welcome people who have thoughts, questions, or just want to discuss this outside of this arena, reach out and talk to me. I'd love to hear your thoughts on what I'm going to be kind of putting some big questions out there. But in addition to just raising questions about, oh, businesses and how they're going to survive, individuals making decisions about, you know, do I want to work? Do we need two incomes in this household? Is leisure and hospitality going to be a big priority of mine in the future? How has my consumption changed? Do I need two cars? Do I want to go on trips? And this is all kind of coming to a head with a lot of conversations. Climate change, you know, people are worried about the overall ecological footprint of humans on the planet. Leisure and hospitality is one of those that's kind of contributes to that. And so people's tastes and preferences for things is changing. And so how is it not only from a standpoint of our business is going to have jobs to fill? We know leisure and hospitality is trying to fill, like they would hire people on the spot, but is the demand going to come back in the same way? And what does that demand look like? And how has that demand changed? And this is where businesses are trying to innovate and figure out who and how they are going to be in the future. So, and it's important to note, these are just filled jobs. If leisure and hospitality is able to fill all the jobs it has, this graph could look significantly different, right? So again, filled jobs. So leisure and hospitality, construction, this is another industry that's near and dear to Addison County's heart. I know there's a big cohort of construction out of Addison County. And you can see from 2007, construction in Vermont never got back to 2007 levels. In the US, it barely did for a short period of time, but then the recession happens, drops off, and you can see that still under where we were in 2007. And this is where the conversation happens about what does the workforce for this industry look like? Construction workers have historically profiled older than average Vermont workers. The same thing for healthcare, the same thing for construction, and the same thing for manufacturing. So in Vermont, the median age is a little over the US, so we're thought to be one of the older states in the nation. But the same impacts are being felt at the US level. This is the demographic shift that's going on across the US. Vermont, we're feeling it a little earlier, but construction is one of those industries that's been saying for a decade, we need workers. I'm worried about how I'm going to fill not only my current jobs that are available, but the jobs that I know are coming available because of retirements or people just phasing out of working in this industry. So construction is a big one where it's a great employment opportunity for individuals of different backgrounds, skill sets, and not even just being on the front lines of swinging a hammer. This is an industry that employs individuals doing payroll, that do marketing, that do all sorts of different things. So it's a diversity of skills across this, but I know particularly with the Department of Labor, we're focused in on the trades and ensuring that our apprenticeship programs are well publicized and hopefully well utilized. Like construction, manufacturing, this is an industry that profiles older than average. Manufacturing, and now we're starting to, now the conversation is switching. Manufacturing has employment levels that have been decreasing for decades. And this is to not say that it is not an important industry or not a productive industry or not a profitable industry. It's just it uses technology differently. Construction, sure, they've leveraged construction technology a little bit differently using different types of machinery, but in manufacturing, it is much more apparent, right? So this is an industry, again, there's a lot of pent-up demand for retirement, older than average workforce. So even if they're losing 10 people to retirement, they might have to fill 5 of those positions. And the skill sets they're looking for those new hires might be a little different than what they historically have because, again, that technology piece. So manufacturing is such a key part of the Vermont economy. I know it might not be the biggest or might not be the get the most press as far as a key industry, but on a percentage-wise, manufacturing, there's a higher concentration of manufacturing employment in Vermont than there is in the US. So that's a percentage terms. So it's not sheer numbers, but as a percentage, there is more manufacturing in the Vermont economy than there is in the US economy. That just shows how important it is in our economy. And this is a very critical, Fred can tell you as an economic development professional, manufacturing is an industry that produces goods that ultimately become exports. And as a result, you're importing new dollars into the economy. Very similar to leisure and hospitality. You're importing new dollars to an economy. And from an economic development standpoint, that's really important because you want new money coming into your community, circulating and creating economic wealth. So manufacturing, again, another industry, and there's Department of Labor, lots of partners out there. I think CCVs of the world that have been really stepping up and working with manufacturers to develop short-term coursework to get people employed in these industries. And because they can be extremely profitable from a wage standpoint as well, and opportunity for growth and development. Retail trade, now we're piggybacking on that conversation of technology changing. Oh, nothing is more front and center in our daily lives than how retail is under a tremendous amount of change associated with technology, right? And you can see it, retail trade has been down since even 2007. And, it was kind of finding its, its balance. It was pretty stable between 2010 and 2017 almost. And, a lot of that's leisure and hospitality, people coming in from out of states, leveraging the products that are for sale here. But you can see with COVID coming in, and now even just, it hasn't even reached a stabilization point, because it even looks like it's arced. And, I don't know about you, but certainly I had never done grocery pickup. I had never done a bunch of different things that I've done now in terms of acquiring goods that I have recently. And I think this is the big question of what does retail trade of the future look like? And this might be a good time to talk about how, again, reemphasize that I'm not in public policy, but a lot of this, what the future of these industries looks like, and particularly what the future of our labor forces look like, public policy will have a lot to say about that. Either through action or inaction, and not to say one is good and one is bad, because sometimes inaction is good and sometimes action is bad. But I'm just saying that public policy could really change the way these things look. And I think about retail trade specifically because there's such a conversation around driverless trucks. And driverless trucks are one of those things that it will require a significant amount of buy-in at the local levels and all levels of government to allow that to even occur. So even if the technology catches up, which they say it is, even though that darn left-hand turn, you have to make one every now and then. Driverless trucks are one of those things that would be a huge disruptor to the labor force. Not to say it's a bad thing. Disruption sometimes means good things will happen in the aggregate over the long run. At least that's what economists tell ourselves to get to sleep at night. But this idea of public policy would have to allow driverless trucks to exist. I see you got a question coming here. Do you attribute online shopping to the number of starting to decline in 2018? Is that reflected here or separate from retail? Yeah, I think online shopping is a big part of that. Thank you for the question, Gina. I think that is what is reflected here, is that that from even 2018, there was starting to be the onboarding, right? Starting to be the acceptance of online shopping. You think about shoes, you think that, that was a big one that really took off. Even cars. Who saw the Carvana commercial? I shouldn't mention specific companies. Who saw the first time they saw a buy a car online ad and thought, oh, that's got to be the dumbest idea? It reminded me pets.com in 2001. I thought for sure, but apparently they are really grabbing significant market share. And we underestimated how much we all dislike going to in-person auto shopping, I guess, because they really, from what I understand, are doing quite well, the online shopping experience for cars. I never thought that was something that would take off because I thought people liked the physical touch of it, but apparently they've figured out that model. So I think online shopping, I think you start seeing it. I think Gina's point's correct. That 2018, there starts to be acceptance. And then COVID just really pushes people over to what that looks like. And the only last point I'll make about retail trade is it certainly feels that things are different, right? And we're going to talk about some data where it looks like the economy is basically where it was pre-pandemic, which is just kind of like a head scratcher until you really dig into it. But when you go into a store now, if you go into a grocery store, it doesn't feel the same, does it? And I'm not just talking about hand sanitizers or masks or whatever. I'm talking about the shelves. You look at the shelves and it's just like, huh, was this aisle always half empty, or is that just new, right? So this is that supply chain conversation that's coming up. And this is, again, where public policy comes into it, where this idea of nationalism. Are we going to allow globalization to continue? From an economist standpoint, we typically value trade. It brings in new ideas. It brings in people who are able to produce goods and services more competitively, allowing us to work on what we're the best at, which a lot of things is design and creation and innovation. So, you know, this idea of like, will there be an overreaction of like, oh, we're shutting our borders down, we're not importing any more goods and services, we got to go it alone kind of thing. So let's see. Oh yeah, thank you, Amy. Amy just said that, yeah, knows someone in her family that just bought a car online. And so yeah, so retail trade is one of those things that it's going to be interesting to see. Obviously, the supply disruptions that are going on are impacting the experience of retail trade. So it's not all bad. Oh, yep, thank you, Fred. It is not all bad news. And I want to say that, you know, we've looked at some graphs that are showing down, down, down. Well, this is where we can kind of pick up with some conversations we've had in the past where I've talked about professional and business services. So professional and business services, these are, I'll think about them as like a lot of small companies that do business to business services. And this is specialization. This is Henry Ford level specialization when he revolutionized manufacturing. This is the specialization 2.0 or 3.0, depending on what wave you want to count that we're at. This is the future of the US economy. This is the future of the Vermont economy. And you can see it was hit during the economic downturn of 2007, but really quickly recovered and led to significant job growth. And even though there was economic disruption due to COVID, it has resumed job growth again. These are, you think about this, this is the biggest grab bag you can imagine, but it is all the services you can imagine, from like management consulting to IT consulting to IT security to IT desktop support to economic services to landscaping to janitorial services, bookkeeping, marketing, PR, anybody who has a specialty and focuses specifically on that specialty. So let's use me as an example. Let's say I decide I want to open up my own economic consulting firm, and I want to focus, you know, for me to be the best I can be as far as revenue standpoint, it's me working on economics, right? Me working on setting up a website or marketing or ads or payroll or taxes or hiring or legalese or drafting contract, any of those services that as soon as I start spending time on, I'm actually like taking away from the ability of my company to maximize its revenue. And that is why you hire somebody out who does exactly that. These are small companies that do what they do it best, and they all partner with each other. They're hiring each other. And what makes this so dynamic is, one, you are able to maximize your potential by specializing in what you do and doing it the best you can. You can have clients around the globe, so you can be anywhere, and this includes teleworking, which in a COVID situation allows for greater flexibility. You can work odd hours, you can do anything. So it creates tremendous flexibility for the people who are able to leverage this. And it, again, though you can focus it on this as like a really, really high specialization, a high skill level. It does run the gamut, as I said, from landscaping to janitorial services. It's focusing on the one thing you want to do and doing it the best you can, right? Even like banks don't clean their banks themselves anymore. They hire cleaning crews to come in at night. I knew someone had a contract that that was their family business. They would go in and clean banks at night, and they did very well for themselves doing that, right? You develop a trusted reputation, and next thing you know, you're in business for yourself, you're employing a few people, and everyone is doing really well for themselves in that regard. So, oh, Julie's got a great question here. I'm going to put a pin in that one. I'll come back to it. Dave's got a question about what percentage of these workers are working for businesses in state or out of state remotely. And that's a great question, right? Because you could be working for a California company, but located here. We don't have good data on that. We're trying to partner with the Vermont Department of Taxes to better understand where these people might be coming from. Every now and then we'll do that just to see if like we can get any sort of meaningful patterns. Because what's odd about these, and this is to Dave's point, is a lot of times when we're looking at the data, we can't tell if it's one employee because they're remote, or it's like one employee because they're self-employed, or maybe it's a self-employed person who has one employee, you know, basically like a very, very small company. So a lot of times data looks the same when it shows up as 1, a 1, a 1, a 1. And we don't know if that is an out-of-state company for a large, you know, unless you read them all and saw, oh, you know, here's a major international company, XYZ, and they have one employee in Vermont, you can assume they're remote. But unless you're willing to read them, and there's thousands of them, that's something we would not have good information on, unfortunately. And so anyway, so this is a big conversation. And if you want to be really positive about it, you can say that that Vermont education, public education, is positioning our students to be very successful in this regard through personalized learning plans, through directed work study, like finding what, you know, someone's passion is, finding what their skills and expertise are, and helping them cultivate that. And, you know, I'm not to say that that's going to be, you know, well, let's just leave it at that. There is a possibility that that's where this ends up. You know, sometimes when you are younger, you might have to kind of cut your teeth, so to speak, by working in the industry a little bit to kind of learn the ins and outs before you start your own. But nonetheless, this is a significant contributor. You know, when I go in and talk to students, you know, it used to be, you know, you anticipate a student raising their hand saying, I have my own company where I mow people's lawns. Well, I've been in a room where a student raised their hand and said, I have a IT company because I go around door to door and do updates for my neighbors who can't update their computers or want to have their information updated for them. And so, you know, you see that innovation that happens even in young people, and that's basically what can be captured here through professional business services, tremendous growth. And when we talk about percentage terms, Vermont has less of this than the US. So there's room to grow here in Vermont. And that remote worker, that teleworking, clients around the globe aspect really could put us in a good position going forward for that. But as I said, the US has a higher concentration of it. There's some big employers in this sector, and they're not found in Vermont currently. So we are kind of on the boutique side of things. But that's how our manufacturing started too. We were a boutique manufacturer, and we did a lot of different things, and we did them well. And that could be a recipe here going forward. So let's take a break. And no statistic on agriculture industry. Why? Great question, John. So as an employee of the Department of Labor, we get our information either through statistical surveys like the ones we partner with Bureau of Labor Statistics, US Census Bureau, but the bulk of our information on industries comes actually from the requirement that the Vermont Department of Labor administer unemployment insurance as a program. And agriculture is one of those industries that is outside the purview of unemployment insurance. So all our data is basically based on who's required to report to us based on unemployment insurance laws. So, so agriculture has an exception. They're not required, except under very certain circumstances, or if they self-elect, to cover their employees with unemployment insurance. It's one of those provisions that was put in to not make it a requirement for agricultural employees to provide unemployment insurance to their employees because of potentially the seasonal nature of it. I don't know. But nonetheless, they are really outside our vantage point. The best information we have, and they've really been cutting back on agricultural data from an economic standpoint, it comes from the agricultural census, which happens every 5 years and gets delayed about a year or two to actually release it. So if you are interested in that information, John, what I can do is I can make the link available where we do a 5-year comparison between the most recent ag census and the prior 5-year ag census. So I can share that with Fred. Let's see, other questions here. Yep, and we do have that other question from Julie that I will get back to. Which is about, as an economist, do you ever ponder the overconsumption of non-essentials? And that is a great question, and it's one actually that's near and dear to my heart and one I'm fascinated by, because this is what the pandemic's asking people to make that decision for their own individual basis. So, like, you know, what are your priorities? What is a need and what is an essential element of your daily life, and what is considered luxury or not necessary or something you could do without. So I think we'll spin back to that in a little bit. Yeah, let's go to the household. We'll go to the household and I'll incorporate Gina's answer, and then we will revisit Julie's question as well as we go forward. So what we just looked at was business data. So that was employers telling the Vermont Department of Labor, either by sample or by census, how many employees they have on payroll. So that's employers saying how many people we employ. We also have data where we actually work with the Census Bureau to talk to Vermont households. Now we're asking people, you know, what's going on with you? And this is where you capture things like self-employed, right? Because a business isn't going to know how many self-employed people are in their community. And businesses report by where the business is located. So that's actually place of work. Now we're switching to place of residence because the people who are answering the questions are in households. And so it's about 1,200 Vermont households. And so if you just, let's call it 2.5 per household, that's about 3,000 Vermonters. 3,000 Vermonters running the age of 0 to 200. I don't think we have any 200-year-olds yet, but you know, whatever the age, max to min. So some of these people aren't going to be in the labor force, some are retired, whatever you have you. This is the mix. This is meant to be a managed panel. It's meant to be representative of all Vermont households. And to Gina's point, yes, we are one of the older states in the nation, according to median age. I think we're third highest in the nation. The ones that typically are highest have similar characteristics to us. They're Maine, New Hampshire, West Virginia, Vermont. Those four tend to be towards the top. And the things that seem to stick out, if you look at statistical comparisons about why, there's some ruralness to those areas, yes. Low birth rates, and we'll talk about low birth rates and what that does to your labor force over time. And also a high concentration of white alone is the census category. And white alone is the racial or ethnic group with the lowest birth rates, again, tying back into birth rates. So that puts us, and white alone, I think, has one of the longer life expectancies as well. So that's gonna, you know, push up our median age as well. So here is some blob of a graph, and really, again, this is a story, so this is more of a prompt for me, so you don't need to focus too much in on it. But in reality, what this is the unemployment rate in pink line, and the blue blob is the number of unemployed on the right axis, the number of unemployed persons in Vermont. And we actually have 3 recessions here. This is 2001 current, so the 2002, 2003 recession didn't hit us very hard in Vermont because we didn't have a lot of .coms. The Great Recession did hit us hard when we were looking at a 6.7% unemployment rate for Vermont. That was extremely high, approximately 24,000 Vermonters unemployed. We were, whoa, you know, Department of Labor was swimming in work because that was a huge surge in the unemployment insurance population claims. But then you see from that point forward, basically around 2010, you know, the unemployment rate drops to historic low levels. And before the pandemic, we were right at historic low levels of under 3% unemployment rate, you know, fewer than 10,000 people unemployed. Well, obviously the pandemic hit and there's a huge spike, jumping up to 15% unemployment rate with 52,000 people unemployed. And this, it's important to make this distinction that it is a popular misconception that the unemployment insurance claims data and the unemployment rate are related. They move, you'd expect them to move similarly, but actually they're very different and they're not compiled the same way. So it's a popular misconception. You know, a lot of people who maybe are data skeptics say, oh, the unemployment rate, that thing's garbage because everyone who's exhausted their benefits isn't counted. No, that has nothing to do with it. Unemployment insurance benefits has an eligibility criteria that is totally separate from the statistical criteria to be declared unemployed by the Bureau of Labor Statistics definition, which we're going to get into here because it's important to this COVID recovery. To be unemployed by the Bureau of Labor Statistics definition, you simply have to have not worked, have looked for work in the last 4 weeks, and be willing and able to accept work if offered. So those are the 3 criteria, right? To be unemployed, you couldn't have worked. You have to be actively looking for work, which some people get all bent out of shape about. But if you're not looking for work, like really are you? Like what? We have metrics of who's not looking for work and why, and we can talk about that population. We have that data. But from an unemployed standpoint, like who's actively out there? Who wants to fill a job? And then that's that last criteria, willing and able to accept work if offered. So what happened here is that we're seeing The unemployment rate is now 2.9%, again, under 3%, excuse me. The total unemployed under 10,000. So we are basically back to pre-pandemic levels of unemployment and unemployment rates. And this is where it's like people will sometimes tune me out or click off or exit the meeting right now because they think I'm all full of it. I have nothing good to contribute. But this is a different type of economic recession, as we talked about. This is much different than the 2010, 2011 situation when there was a lot of people clamoring for work. And the reason is this data is not going to capture it. What is going to capture it is our labor force data. The labor force is the blue line across the top. The labor force is simply the number of unemployed plus the number of employed. So you have employment and labor force on this graph, and we'll talk about the differences. As they get farther apart, that means unemployment's growing. So you can see during the recession and the labor force peak of May 2009, you can see the gap between the blue line and the red line is the biggest, and that's where the unemployment population is the highest, right? So there's no, those are how those two slides are related. But you can see how COVID, we've kind of been bouncing around. Our labor force was growing from 2001 to 2009, 10. There was a big, during economic downturns, it can be counterintuitive for people, but actually people come into the labor force a lot of times during economic downturns because of economic stress on their household. So if your partner had their hours cut or lost their job, you might enter the labor force just to help out the household, right? Or if you were going to retire, but then an economic downturn happens, the stock market crashes, your housing price crashes, your retirement accounts crash, you're like, you know what, this isn't a good time to retire, I'm going to wait. And so for pent-up demand due to retirement and people who entered the labor force out of economic necessity, the labor force tends to grow during economic downturn. But as economic conditions improve, you'll start to see those people phase out. And that's what happens in 2010. You see our labor force start to go down. And it is not a coincidence that in 2011, the leading edge of the baby boomers turned 65. And so you can start seeing those people phasing out, and that those people in good economic times, people don't have to be in the labor force due to economic necessity. You see the labor force contracting over that time period. Well, if you look at what happened after COVID, you can see our labor force has taken this massive hit, and it is yet to recover. And that's the true story coming out of COVID right now, is that we lost about 30,000 from our labor force at its worst. We're now down about 25,000. Down 25,000 means we're down about 7% of our labor force. That is an astronomically large number. And so it comes to back to that discussion we had about, what is the labor force? The labor force is the summation of the people who are employed or unemployed. Well, we know employment's taken a hit, but unemployment hasn't taken a hit, right? We looked, it's very similar to what it was before. So what is it? It is that people are actually out of the labor force. And if they're not working, then it must have something to do with the criteria associated being defined as unemployed. And if we look at that again, have they looked for work in the last 4 weeks? Yes, actually, we're seeing that a lot of those people have actually looked for work in the last 4 weeks, because we can see that through what's called a discouraged worker count. Those are the people who give up looking for work. That population is back to pre-pandemic levels. There's only about 800 people in the Vermont economy. That's a really dirty statistical estimate, but that is the statistical estimate. About 800 people are discouraged workers in the state of Vermont. Those are people who say, there's no work out there for me, so I'm no longer going to give up. I'm going to give up looking for work. They've removed themselves from the labor force because they don't think there's opportunities. And you don't have to fall too far out of your household to find that there are tremendous opportunities, whether they are stuffed in your mailbox or there's a delivery van driving by with a help wanted sign on it, or if you go to a local convenience store, restaurant, or drive down Route 7, you will see help wanted signs flashing you in the face in neon, right? And so that is not the criteria. It is this other criteria. Are you willing and able to accept work if offered, right? And this gets back into, I think, what Julie's point is that we've just gone through a global health pandemic, and now people are starting to say, holy cow, what's going on for me? What are the priorities? What are my tastes and preferences? What is my one true life going to be? And this is where, it gets really hard to answer questions like, are you willing and able to accept work if offered? Oh goodness, well, is my child's daycare running? Is my child's school running? Is this work going to be telework? I used to work in leisure and hospitality in the back of the house in a restaurant, and there was 6 of us in the span of in a small kitchen. has my employer considered PPE or increasing spacing, or what has been done to accommodate increased separation between coworkers? I'm worried about the health of myself or the health of my mixed generational household, whether that's young or old. And so this conversation, this is the population that is truly dropped out of the labor force. Are they willing and able to accept work if offered? Unfortunately, we don't know enough about the differences. It's just kind of like the survey ends there. But we think it has a lot to do with those questions that I raised, of like concerns for their own health, or concerns the health of the people in their household, uncertainty related to childcare, uncertainty related to hours, or even business demands. So this is the big thing to watch. Some of this is demographics, right? As we talked about, the leading edge of the baby boomers, if they were 65 in 2011, guess what they are in 2021? The leading edge is 75. And the labor force participation rate, somebody 75 and older versus somebody 65 and older, is much lower, right? So that is a bigger transition and a bigger phase out, and well deserved. These are people that have a long work lives, and they're saying, you know what, I'm going to start focusing on other things right now, and rightly as they should, as they choose to. You want choice in this. As it makes sense, it's always tough when out of economic necessity you're forced into the labor force, regardless of your age. But nonetheless, this is downward pressure. And so if we were thinking about the 25,000, now I'm going to break down this 25,000 for you a little bit. If you think about the 25,000 that left the labor force, there was some data that we got from the Bureau of Labor Statistics midway through the pandemic that said 7,500 had a change in retirement status. Another 2,500 had a change in disability status. And it's not absolutely gold, you can't take it to the bank with this, but from an economic standpoint, a lot of times when you have a change in retirement status or you have a change in disability status, those tend to be end of the road type decisions as it relates to the labor force and labor force participation. So that could mean in aggregate, there's about 10,000 people who might not be coming back to the labor force. So of that 25,000, we may get 15 of them back, just kind of rolling that up. We're not 100% sure on that, but that is the indication that we have some data to say, let's start the conversation or pick up the conversation there. So, it makes it a big discussion about where's the future labor force going to come from? What are the needs of current employers, and how does this all happen? So let me just some things. Oh yeah, Gina's point about older workers might have a greater fear or risk associated with health, especially in a global health pandemic, and that's a totally valid point. So I wanted to talk a little bit about Addison County here, because what makes Addison County unique, many ways, of course, all positive. But when you look at the 2 years between September, I use 2-year comparison, trying to compare September to September, because this data is not seasonally adjusted at the county level. So you want to either be using annual averages or compare the same month over years. So I used the September 2021 because that's the most recent observation. And then I used 2 years ago because it captures pre-pandemic. That makes me sad to say I had to go 2 years back to capture pre-pandemic, but yes, that's the world we're living in. The labor force is only down 442 in Addison County, and I say only. That's only down 2%. And as I said, for the Vermont overall, we're down 7%. So there's been quite stability across the labor force in Addison County. And so the number of unemployed people is actually cut in half. That's also unique because, down basically 44%, down 207. So what gives you your pressure right now? A couple of things. One, you have this contraction over the last 2 years of about 650 people out of your labor force, right? Or like you have 400 that aren't in the labor force at all, and 200 of them no longer are even unemployed. So I'm kind of looking at those and kind of mixing concepts there. But for most parts of the state, their unemployed numbers are the exact same, and their labor force is all contracted, like in the thousands, like 7, 8, 9% of their labor force. I was just looking at some counties down south, just huge contractions in the labor force over the short period of time. So this is what makes it unique to Addison County. And I think some of this has got to be the pressure of Chittenden County on you because the job opportunities there is maybe buoying the labor force, absorbing some of your unemployed because you're more, I would say, economically tied that way, facing north. A lot of activity just within Addison County itself, just focused there. So it's not like you are 100% externally focused. But the point being, this is what makes Addison County unique, is that you've actually had a real pull back in the number of unemployed, which many counties haven't seen. And you've had a relatively stable labor force over these 2 years, which again, many counties haven't seen. So that's kind of unique. Now, unfortunately, I don't have all the breakdowns of the statistics that I can talk about, like who these people are, either gender or race or ethnicity or age. So we have to kind of roll back up to the the Vermont discussion for much of this. And so we're going to talk a little bit more about the labor force. And this particular this economic downturn has been dubbed a recession for two reasons. One, the industries that were hit hardest by COVID were typically there are high concentrations of women employed in these industries. And I apologize, this says gender on it, but really it's probably more akin to sex, because this is part of our federal programs where it is a binary male-female flag. So, I know at the Department of Labor, we're working to incorporate additional or greater granularity when it comes to metrics around sex or around gender. Still working through our language on this, but this particular data all comes from federal sources, which these partnerships dictated is a binary male-female flag. So when I'm talking about male versus female or men versus women, that's what I'm alluding to here. And not the greatest information or not the best way to cut things, certainly, but it is what we have. So in Vermont, we are unique in that we will publish data of where there are the division of workers by men versus women by industry. We have that information on our website. And you can see that the industries that were hardest hit, leisure and hospitality, social assistance, education, there was a higher concentration of women that worked in those industries. And as a result, women were disproportionately impacted. And so we can even see from the job loss numbers, 55% of all job loss were women. So that is kind of, the 2007 recession sometimes get dubbed a man session. Well, this one has been dubbed a she session because of this. First, the industries had high concentrations of women. And second, the disruptions to childcare and education, the workload that increased because of the disruptions of childcare and education fell disproportionately on women and women household or women-led households. So that caused some disruption there as well. For all the changes that have happened in terms of labor force participation rate and how it's grown tremendously for women over the decades, peaking around 2008, somewhere around there, I believe. The one statistic that really haven't moved is time and use studies about the division of labor within a household between men versus women. Women still disproportionately maintain a greater household hours as it relates to childcare, as it relates to household duties. And I think during COVID, that was magnified and emphasized, unfortunately. There's a couple of statistics. It gets a little sad for me towards the end of this presentation. There's a couple of things that I have to kind of acknowledge. That one, for my male brethren, we need to step it up in the household. But this idea that occupational segregation, I think, is important to mention. When we talk about hard-hit industries disproportionately impacting certain groups, that's as a result of occupational segregation. And this is something I honed in on as a concern of mine, and my division identified it, and I've worked with different commissioners over the years to try and move the needle on this, where you start talking about which industries employ men and which industries employ women, which occupations are filled by men and which occupations are filled by women. And even though we've done a bunch of outreach, we're really trying to increase career awareness for young people, the needle has actually moved in to be worse. So occupational segregation has only gotten worse over the last decade, which is shocking. We only have national data on that to support that, but the Change the Story group really did a lot of excellent work around trying to document what information was out there about this. And if anything, you can say there's either been no progress on occupational segregation or negative progress, I guess is how you'd say it. And now we're going to switch to my other sad news story in just a second. So I do highlight, what does the recovery look like for this population? This is where that public policy conversation comes in, right? There's big conversation at the state and federal level about public policy. I'll leave it at that. You know, what does childcare look like? What does education look like? What does paid family medical leave look like in the United States or in Vermont? Those are all things that could contribute to an economic recovery or return to the labor force for women, because we are seeing the early indications. We've seen some data that shows women have left the labor force, particularly in the age cohorts of 25 to 45. Labor force composition, race and ethnicity. Here's some interesting information. So we talked about how we have the 2010 census results and we have partial 2020 census results. Well, if we look at the 2010, where we were 10 years ago, according to the census, 1 out of every 20 people in Vermont was not part of the white alone category, which is the US Census Bureau's category for white, or basically white alone. There's a number of other categories for race and ethnicity, Black or Asian Pacific, indigenous population. They even have a multi race as a category. Anyway, focusing in on the fact that in 2010, 5%, or 1 out of every 20 people, identified as not part of the white alone category. By 2020, that population is now 10%, so it has doubled. So instead of 1 out of every 20, it is now 1 out of every 10 people identify as not white alone. Large growth across the multiple race category is the early indication. But what's most important is that this trend is not going away, and that's a good thing, because it's going to lead to greater racial and ethnic diversity across the Vermont economy. And as the economist, again, going back to what I said earlier, we believe that different perspectives, different ideas leads to greater innovation and leads overall to greater economic growth. So our labor force is going to have a greater composition of race and ethnicity. And particularly, if you dive into the data, we're seeing that there's a higher concentration of young people who fall in those categories of the not white alone group. And so this means that, again, the labor force is just going to get increase. And so as, for Vermont employers, ensuring that they have are creating workplaces that are ready for a changing labor force. Tremendous opportunities here. Labor force composition by age. This is now, we're getting to my other, in addition to occupational segregation. This is my other one that's crux. We talked about the earliest baby boomers turning 75 in 2021, and that's a big part of our economic downturn for the labor force pullback. But the youth labor force participation rates, this is the one that has been a real head scratcher for me for the last decade, and something I've been actively working on to figure out what it means. And maybe it's not a bad thing. Maybe it means young people are getting more education and more, staying in school longer. I don't know. But I still hold on to this old mentality that while I am not employed at A&P any longer, I learned tremendous value at working at A&P in a grocery store. The skills, not only just like the soft skills or the professional skills you learn, but what you learn about yourself, the roles and responsibilities that you thrive in, the situations that you can learn from. We've seen the labor force participation rate go from mid-60s in the 2000s to now below 40%. And particularly during COVID, there's been a bigger pullback, I think, as there's greater uncertainty associated with education and, trying to really fit in other extracurricular activities. We know that it is tough for young people right now, and maybe work is the furthest thing from their mind. But the dropping labor force participation rate even extends into the next age cohort, 20 to 24, is just not so magnified. The last time I saw research on why that population was declining, for a little while, there was a whole bunch of naysayers. There was even an article in the Wall Street Journal that was trying to label it the youngest generation as the do-nothing generation, because they couldn't find them in education and they couldn't find them in work. And so someone took offense to that do-nothing generation article and actually dove in and did some research. And what they found is that if you think of 4 populations, there's say there's young people doing nothing, and then there's some that are working, there's some in school, and then there's some that are working and in school. It's that last population that's declined the most, the working and in school. It's now like an either or. It's like either I go to school or I go to work, as opposed to both. And that's where the biggest drop off, based on the last research I saw. And it makes sense in that regard. Maybe education's more demanding, or maybe extracurriculars are more rewarding or enriching and just the preferred choice. But still, those part-time jobs can really help. And there's a lot of other economic research that shows that the earlier you start work, the greater your economic success is going to be, not only from an earning standpoint, but also from a job change standpoint, avoiding starting and stopping in education that you might actually learn, oh, I didn't want to do that. I think that ultimately is my greatest fear, right? Someone going right from high school, right into college with a 4-year degree in something, and they come out and say, I'm ready for the world. And they realize, oh my goodness, what I studied either has no bearing or I'm not interested in working in that field. You think of the person who studied nursing and is like, oh, I don't want to be a nurse. You're like, oh goodness, could we have gotten you additional career awareness that would have helped you make a better decision? But, John's pointing out the story here is that young people don't have a real work ethic, and maybe it's just baloney, but it's a story out there. And I've heard that one too. And from what I've seen from Addison County, it's like my mom hails from Franklin County, big agricultural roots as Addison County had. You never had to worry about work ethic from someone from Franklin County or Addison County, right? They grew up on farms. They knew how hard it was to get up in the morning, meant 5 o'clock, if not earlier, and what that meant. And so, I think there's some of that. It is possible that the economic downturn or the contraction in the labor force will put pressure on households that young people will have to return. It was pretty common, 60s, 70s, 80s, that young people were forced into the labor force to help their households have to meet, the bills, so to speak. So there could be some of that in the future. Okay, we are wrapping up here, and I certainly want to give more time for our conversation, and whatever is left over for time, I will do filler on talking about consumption, which is something I think about. I don't get paid to think about it at Department of Labor, but in my free time, that's a lot of what my thoughts are about, consumption. So some of the things that we've done at the Department of Labor, we've partnered with the McClure Foundation to highlight Vermont's high pay, high demand jobs. This is something that we really wanted to, start attacking that issue of low labor force participation rate among youth and occupational segregation. We wanted to emphasize employment opportunities here in the state of Vermont that are available, that are obtainable, that lead to good wages. This partnership has been very beneficial. We love working with the McClure Foundation on this. And they even doubled down this year. This is our 4th iteration, but this time they even supplemented it with an additional brochure highlighting the best bet career training programs for Vermonters. And they highlight 7. So that other brochure has about 50 to 60. It's meant occupations that are highlighted, and it's meant to be interactive, to start discussions, to get people talking and thinking. But for young people, seeing a list of 50 or 60 occupations might be overwhelming, even if it is done in a layout that's meant to help them walk through it. So McClure said, you know what, let's dig in, figure out what short-term career training programs make sense for Vermonters. These are training programs in Vermont for jobs in Vermont. Everything from what we have at the Department of Labor of electrical and plumbing apprenticeships. We have many more apprenticeships than that, but those are the big ones. Bookkeeping certificate, IT desk support specialist, working in manufacturing, or getting into the healthcare industry by working as an LPN. Again, these are 7 programs, either at CCV or VTC, that can be done locally and ultimately lead. And for a while, there was even grant money to support people who are willing to pursue these. So I don't know if that grant money is still around, but if you know young people, or you are, work with a youth group, feel free to either request these brochures from me or the McClure Foundation. But there might be even resources to help people be put through these programs, because we know the biggest difference between success and a meaningful traineeship program a lot of times is support staff. There's some great economic research into that, and the only difference between who successfully completes and who can't complete training programs that ultimately lead to guaranteed employment with guaranteed wage increases is support around them, meaning whether that's family or friends, a couch to sleep on, whatever it takes sometimes. So wrapping up, in conclusion, the skills of yesterday are still the things we're amplifying as the skills of today, and many of which will continue to be skills of tomorrow, which is showing up on time, work well with others, follow instructions. It is one of the messages I take out there to young people all the time to say, man, you know, all you have to do, you say those 3 things to an employer, you will be hired on the spot. You know, it takes courage and conviction to be able to stand up and face someone and say, you know what, I work well with others, I follow instructions, and I will be here on time. So, you know, we can be reached at vtlmi.info. Please reach out to me. My contact information is there. Complete our survey. Give us ideas. Let us know what areas of study would be helpful, or if you're looking for data for your own personal research. This is what we do. You don't have to be an expert in this information. You just know how to contact us, and we will help walk you through it. That's what we do. So thank you so much for the time this morning. You know, I think, you know, I love visiting Addison counties too, that is not in person, but I appreciate the virtual option today.
Matt, thank you very much. Appreciate your insights and all this information. Really a lot to think about, and confirms a lot of the other information I've heard about, you know, our workforce issues right now. A lot of personal individual decisions being made, and that makes it hard to make an impact on the workforce, you know, make changes, because we're not dealing with businesses, we're dealing with individuals. How do you know, so how do we make a change? But good stuff to think about. Any other questions for Matt before we call it a day, a morning? Just raise your hand or unmute yourself and speak up. No, no questions. All right.
Matt,
Oh,
I do. Sorry, Fred. Matt, if you circled back to whether or not we're seeing any trending changes in the age demographics, I didn't capture it. So I'm just curious if you could quickly speak to that. I know we're probably all anxious to move on with our day, and I'll just add to what everyone said in the chat. This was a great presentation, as it always is from you.
Oh, no, yeah, thanks for the question, Gina. I'll do my best, and if I don't hit it, just let me know. But, you know, we are still waiting for the 2020 breakdown, but our labor force, I guess, are you trying to, could you clarify your question? Are you talking about like mature workers or young workers or?
So your comment was about how we're remaining one of the oldest states in the nation.
Yes.
All I'm curious about is, you know, demographics obviously change. That's why you have a job. And I'm just wondering if you're seeing any trend in, are we closing the gap in terms of our difference from the nation, or is it really stable, or is it getting worse?
Oh, gotcha. Yeah. The broad trend is that we've been quite stable for about a decade or two. We've been about the 3rd oldest state for as long as I've been in this job, vacillating between 2 and 4, but normally around 3. So there doesn't seem to be like any large out-migration, for example, of like, say, retirees going to Florida, or if they do, they still declare Vermont as a residence, so they're still captured. I mean, the one thing we will see as the population ages, because of the way the labor force participation rate is calculated, it's anyone over the age of 16. So if we have a higher concentration of people over the age of 80 or 90, you know, our labor force participation rate is going to drop. You know, we were very accustomed to seeing our labor force participation rate above the US pre-pandemic. We used to have a 66% labor force participation rate versus a US of around like 63, 64. With the pandemic, we've dropped to 60. The US, I think, is down to 62, and we're not budging from that 60 right now. And I don't know how many of those people are going to come back. But the one thing, you know, we had, I think there was 2019, we had one of the largest cohorts of births in the state of Vermont. But a large cohort of births for the state of Vermont. And they were like, oh, it's been like the largest since like 1970 or something like that. But even in those terms, it was still extremely small, you know, relative to what you're looking for. And so having a low birth rate for 10 or 20 years, it really can take its toll on its labor force. And I used to talk a lot more about this. So like, what do you hear? You know, like, 'cause people always hear things like, so one of the ones is an example you heard, oh, young people don't have a work ethic. And the other one we used to hear is like, what young people are young people are leaving the state. And the reason people came to that conclusion that young people are leaving the state is they look around, they wouldn't see any young people. Well, the problem is they were never born, right? There was no change in how many people were staying or going. It was just like, our class sizes, the education conversation is caught up. That is like, oh, our student age population is really low. And I think that's why the 2020 census information is going to be so interesting of like those 17,000 people we didn't anticipate in our population. Who are they? What age are they? Are we getting a greater, is our in-migration two people, families that are having children, are like 3 or 4, or are they in the out-migration, the 75 and olders? That's what I think we're really looking for this 2020 census. And I think that's going to be really telling. But demographics is one of those strange things that takes a long time to change.
Yeah.
And for us, even though we might be making improvements, we're still going to be ranked where we're ranked, because you think of like the Floridas of the world, they have super high concentration of young people and a high birth rate. And so their age profile, even though you think of Florida as old, it's not. It's actually quite young relative to many other states, and because of immigration, because of birth rates, things like that.
Thank you.
Oh yeah, my pleasure. Good question. And sometimes I talk fast, and I'm not properly caffeinated this morning, so I like a little all over the place.
On the youth demographic, I think it's not that it's not the work ethic. They're making personal decisions, just like the older demographic is. They're finding it easier to retire instead of going back into the workforce. The younger generation, due to a lot of factors, have a distrust of business and capitalism, and they're deciding, and they don't trust that if they go to work for a business, they're going to get the compensation and benefits that they think they deserve. And they're deciding to start businesses on their own or work for themselves. And this is, I'm speaking out of personal experience on this with my 3 kids, but I think that's more the factor, more than that they're lazy. It's more they have a different idea about what work is and what a rounded life, a lifestyle is. And it doesn't involve 40 hours of work or more every week. Well, thanks again, Matt, and everybody that joined us today. I think this is very interesting and productive, and we thank you for joining us this year for our annual meeting, and hopefully we'll see you all, your lovely live faces next year. So thank you. Thanks for coming, and enjoy your day.
Thank you.